My cat dragged home a tiny bobcat cub. What happened next shocked everyone. 3 days after the snowstorm buried Cedar Ridge, Ben Harper sat by a dying fire, watching a single candle flame. Outside, the world lay silent under 2 feet of snow, the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. Honey had not come home for 3 days. That cream-colored cat had been his only companion since Margaret died. An American Shorthair with amber eyes and routines you could set your watch by. Every dawn, out through the cat door. Every dusk, back in, sometimes with a mouse, sometimes with just snow on her whiskers. But 3 days, and the cat door had not swung inward once. Ben had lit the candle the way Margaret used to do when something needed to be released. When her mother passed. When their daughter Sarah moved to Portland and stopped calling. When the doctor told them about the tumor. He'd learned the gesture from her. Light the candle, sit with it, let your heart speak its goodbye. So he sat there accepting what the forest had probably already taken. Honey was old, older than most cats ever got. Maybe she'd simply walked into the snow to find a quiet place, the way animals do when they know their time has come. He was forming the words, "Thank you for staying with me, thank you for not letting this place go completely silent," when he heard it. A creak. The front door's bottom hinge, the one he'd been meaning to oil for 6 winters. Ben's heart kicked against his ribs. He stood so quickly the chair scraped backward. The door stood open perhaps 6 inches, and there, stepping across the threshold with exhausted deliberation, was Honey. She looked like she'd been pulled through a thorn bush and frozen solid. Her fur was matted with ice and snow. She was thinner, her shoulder blades sharp against her coat. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath. They held something urgent and pleading and utterly exhausted. And in her mouth, carried with the gentleness a mother cat uses to transport kittens, was something small and dark and barely moving. Ben dropped to his knees. Honey walked directly to him and lowered her head, releasing what she carried onto the braided rug Margaret had made from old wool coats. It wasn't a kitten. The ears were too long, tufted at the tips. The paws too large. A lynx cub, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its gray-brown fur damp and cold, its sides barely rising with breath. When Ben placed his palm against its ribs, he could feel a heartbeat as faint and fast as a frightened bird's. Honey made a low, rasping cry, then simply collapsed beside the cub, as if whatever strength had carried her this far had finally run out. Ben's hands moved before his mind caught up. He scooped up both animals and carried them to the warmest spot, the corner beside the cast-iron stove. He grabbed his old wicker basket, lined it with Margaret's blue blanket with white stars, and settled the cub inside. Then he placed Honey beside it. The old cat draped one paw across the cub, pulling it close to her warmth. Ben stayed awake all night, keeping the fire hot. The cub, he started calling it Ember because of its gray coloring and because it had been pulled from the cold like something salvaged from ruins, did not wake, did not drink. Each breath was a small, brave, fragile decision to continue. By the second day, Ben managed to get a few drops of water into Ember's mouth using a medicine dropper. The cub swallowed reflexively but didn't wake. He tried broth, then tiny bits of ground meat pressed against the cub's gums. Sometimes the small mouth would work slowly, and Ben would count it as a victory. Honey recovered enough to eat and drink, though she refused to leave the basket for more than a few minutes. She'd rise, use the litter box, drink water, then return immediately to groom the cub with her rough pink tongue. Ben watched this and felt something frozen since Margaret died beginning to thaw. On the 4th night, everything changed. A sound woke Ben. He turned toward the basket and saw Ember convulsing, small body racked with tremors, breathing shallow. Fever. The cub's fur was hot to the touch, its nose dry and cracked. Honey stood, trying to lick the cub's face, to pull it back from wherever it was slipping. Ben worked through the night, sponging Ember's body with cool water, dripping liquid into its mouth, whispering the way he'd whispered to Margaret in those final days. "Sit. Stay with us. You're not done yet." On the 5th day, the fever broke. Ember opened its eyes fully for the first time, blinked slowly, and looked directly at Ben. Then it turned toward Honey and made a small sound, almost a chirp. Honey responded with a low rumbling purr. Ben sat back, his whole body sagging with relief so profound it felt like grief in reverse. From that point on, Ember recovered with the astonishing resilience of the young. Within a week, eating soft food. Within 2 weeks, walking on unsteady legs, exploring corners and batting at dust motes. Honey followed everywhere, patient and watchful, correcting with a gentle paw when Ember got too rough. Ben felt something he hadn't felt in years, simple, clean joy. As winter deepened, Ember grew. The paws that had seemed comically large began to fit its body. Its tufted ears stood tall. Its coat thickened into something magnificent, silver-gray marked with darker spots. The cabin filled with sounds, click of claws on wood, rustle of something wild moving through rooms that had known only stillness. Ben started leaving the back door open so Ember could explore the yard, practice hunting. And every time, the cub came back. Sometimes after an hour, sometimes after 3. But always back, with snow on its whiskers and that look of satisfaction. One evening, Ben sat by the fire, Honey on his lap, watching Ember sprawled on the rug, sound asleep. He thought about Margaret, about how she'd always said the world was full of small miracles if you paid attention. This was bigger. His cat had gone into a blizzard and brought home life. Had seen something dying and decided it deserved a chance. And in doing so, she'd given Ben a chance too. A reason to keep the fire burning. A reason to believe that even after everything ends, something new can begin. He kissed the top of Honey's head. "Thank you," he whispered. Outside, snow fell in silence. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere between those two sounds, Ben found peace. By early spring, Ember was nearly half-grown, sleek and powerful and undeniably wild, spending more time outside than in, sometimes gone for whole days. One March morning, Ben woke to find Honey sitting at the window, staring out. He looked where she was looking and saw Ember at the edge of the tree line, head turned toward the forest, listening to something he couldn't hear. "It's time, isn't it?" Ben said quietly. Honey made a small sound. They watched as Ember took one step toward the trees, then stopped and looked back at the cabin. Honey stood on the windowsill and pressed one paw against the glass. Ember saw it. Then, in one smooth motion, turned and disappeared into the forest. The emptiness was immediate and total. Ben picked up Honey and sat down. They stayed like that for hours, neither moving. When evening came, Ben finally spoke. "We did a good thing. We saved a life. Maybe 2. You saved Ember. Ember saved me. And now Ember gets to live the life it was meant to live." Honey began to purr. Weeks passed. Then one April evening as the sun was setting, Ben heard a sound outside. A low, rumbling call. He walked to the door, heart already knowing. There, sitting in the yard, was Ember. Bigger now, fully grown, coat gleaming, eyes bright and wild. From behind Ben came another sound. Honey walked out onto the porch, moving stiffly but steady. She stopped at the edge and made a sound Ben had never heard before, something between a chirp and a trill. Ember walked forward until it was directly below the porch. The two animals looked at each other. Then Honey jumped down and landed right in front of Ember. For a moment, they just stood there, nose to nose. Then Honey reached up with one paw and bopped Ember gently on the head. Ember lowered its ears, accepting, then very carefully pressed its forehead against Honey's. They stayed like that. Then Ember stepped back, turned, and walked into the trees. Honey watched until the lynx disappeared, then walked back to Ben. He scooped her up and carried her inside. "You got to say goodbye," Ben whispered. "That's a gift." After that, Ember came back regularly. Once every few weeks, appearing at dusk. Honey would always go out to meet it, no matter how stiff her legs. They'd touch noses, or Honey would groom Ember's face, and then Ember would leave. Ben started leaving food out sometimes. Not bait, not payment. Just kindness freely given. One summer night, Ember came with company. 2 cubs, smaller but healthy and strong. Ember's cubs. Honey walked out and sat between them like a matriarch surveying her grandchildren. Ben watched from the porch and thought about Margaret. She would have liked this. Would have been glad the cabin held life again. Ben went to the old maple tree Margaret had loved and cut a small branch. In his workshop, he carved it into a collar for Ember, carving a small flame symbol and the words, "Ember loved." He also walked deep into the forest with his recorder until he found where the lynx den had been. He played Honey's call and waited. Then, distant and echoing, came an answer. Ember's mother, still alive, still calling for her lost child. Ben recorded that sound. Every night after, he played it softly in the cabin. Ember would lift its head, ears swiveling toward the sound. "Love," Ben said aloud, "sometimes means helping someone leave safely." But leaving wasn't simple. As word spread through Cedar Ridge, and word always spread in small towns, complications arrived. Linda Carter started telling people about the lynx. "Did you hear old Ben Harper's got himself a wild animal?" Casual became concerned, concerned became alarmed. Robert Hayes, a farmer with a temper, started talking about traps. Eventually, Sheriff Carol Bennett came up the mountain, her face set in reluctant duty. "Ben, you know why I'm here. I need you to give me the lynx." "No. It's not legal. Wild animals aren't pets. That thing needs to be released." "That thing," Ben said quietly, "was dying. And it's not a pet. It's a guest." They stood in the cold, 2 old people who'd known each other for decades, stuck on opposite sides of a line neither wanted to be on. "I can't just walk away from this. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to wait." Before Carol could respond, the door opened. There was Ember, grown to the size of a medium dog, sleek and muscled. The lynx walked forward calmly and stood beside Ben, meeting Carol's eyes with a gaze that held neither fear nor aggression. Carol stared at the wooden collar around its neck. Ember loved. She looked at Ben, then at Ember, then toward the forest. "I got a call from Wildlife Conservation. Local lynx population is stable. They're not concerned about one cub, especially if it's being cared for." She paused. "I don't see any violation here today." Carol turned and walked to her vehicle. Ben watched her drive away. "You're a hell of a diplomat," he said to Ember. The next day, Ben cleared out a corner of his porch shed, lined it with dry grass, and left the door open. He hung a small wooden sign, "Ember once loved." 2 days later, at dawn, Ember walked out and didn't come back. Ben stood at the window for a long time, then sat down with Honey in his lap and let himself cry. Every winter when the snow came, Ember returned. Sometimes alone, sometimes with cubs, teaching them what Honey had taught, that not all human places are dangerous. They'd sit visible through the window while Ben read and Honey dozed. Ben would leave a little meat on a plate by the open door. Not payment, just kindness. The cabin became a quiet haven. Children from Cedar Ridge came to hear Ben's stories about Honey and Ember, about love that crossed boundaries people thought were fixed. Near the end, Ben began writing a journal for Honey. "Here's what I've learned from you and Ember," he wrote. Each page held a single truth: silence can heal. What you save might save you in return. Home is wherever you're not alone. When he finished, he placed the notebook on Honey's basket. The old cat rubbed her head against it, marking it with her scent, then slept. Ben sat in his chair and looked out at the forest. A man who thought he was done with life had found a reason to keep living. Just the quiet daily work of caring, of loving without expectation. And it was enough. Ben Harper lived completely at peace until the day he didn't. The people of Cedar Ridge found him in that chair, Honey asleep in his lap, the journal open beside them. They buried him beside Margaret under the maple tree and kept the cabin standing, the porch door open. Every winter, Ember came back, older and grayer, still watching, still remembering that once there was a place where love was offered freely and kindness had no price. The children kept coming to hear the stories, learning through the quiet example of an old man, an old cat, and a wild creature who'd been saved and who'd saved in return, that gentleness can be strength, that love is a language every heart can speak. Did you enjoy this story? And you? If an old cat showed up at your door in a snowstorm carrying a dying wild animal, would you take them in and fight to save them both, even knowing it might break your heart in the end? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.